Welcome to another episode of the Profitable Home Services Podcast. Remember, this podcast is all about increasing your profits. And as I almost always say, we want to help you become wildly profitable. And that's a wonderful goal to have. But the only way to meet that goal is to do all the various small steps, that consistency over the years that really starts building out your business so that you become wildly profitable. Well, today I'd like to welcome our guest, Cameron Bishop from Raincatcher. And I'm going to let Cameron tell you a little bit about their company and what they do before we head off into our topic. So, welcome, Cameron.
Great. Thank you for having me, Diane.
You're
A
welcome.
little bit about
You bet.
Raincatcher. So our firm is a combination business broker and lower middle market investment bank. So we kind of have a distinguishing factor there where some businesses have 1 million or less in profits, and those that have more, generally in the 2 million to 10 million range, uh, go through our investment bank. I am one of 5 partners in the firm and a managing director, and we are what's referred to as a sell side firm. So we represent business owners when they decide it's time to sell their companies. And we work nationwide, and we are very much industry agnostic. So we handle small businesses anywhere from SaaS platform software up through heavy construction, all types of business services, which is a very hot category today, distribution, manufacturing. So we pretty much cover all of the various sectors. We don't really focus on the ag sector because that is just so specialized.
It is. Yes. Okay. Well, very good. That's way better than what I could have done, even though I do have your bio in front of me. So, as we were talking offline, there's a lot that goes into selling a business. We don't just wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to sell my business, call a broker, put it on the market, and it sells in a week. That doesn't happen.
It does not.
It never, ever, ever does that happen. Well, maybe it does to somebody, but we don't generally see those kinds of things. So let's talk a
But
little bit about what does it take to even begin to be ready to sell your business?
sure. Well, one part of your statement just before this, I see way, way, way too often, and that is business owners who wake up one morning and decide to sell. That's a huge problem and a challenge. They don't understand the runway required to properly, essentially stage their business for sale. So the key metric that I see is that the vast majority of business owners spend 95% of their time working in their business,
Yes.
managing the day-to-day operations, out in the field, dealing with customers, putting out small fires, etc. And they only spend, if they're lucky, 5% of their time doing what we call working on their business or preparing it for an eventual sale. And that's what they need to begin to think about. In a perfect world, they need to make a decision on when they would like to sell, because everybody's going to leave their company someday. And you can either choose to do it on your own terms or you can do it while you're horizontal. And sadly, we see way too many cases where the owner didn't do the planning work and did pass on before there was a successor in place or the company was structured for exit. And I've seen some truly sad, sad stories of what happens when that's the case. So we encourage owners to really begin thinking about their exit and ideally beginning to plan 5 years before that. Seldom do we see that, but if we can get them to do at least 3 years or 2 years, I would consider that a huge luxury in being able to help a business owner maximize his or her exit value when they sell their company.
I think most business owners, and I'm going to say home service business owners because that's who we specialize in, they don't realize that there's so many steps to getting your business ready. They think that runway is a lot shorter. You just said 5 years. I've heard other brokers say at least 5 years. of all these things you have to do to get that business so that it looks juicy and wonderful and amazing to somebody who would like to buy it. Because most people wanting to buy a business are not wanting to just buy a job. They want a business that's going to make money for them. So let's talk about what are some of the things that has to happen during that 5 year or even a 3 year time period? What are some of the changes that they need to make with how they're running their business?
Sure. And so let's look at the fundamentals, the key areas where we see shortfalls that either cause a business, a home services business, to be unsellable or to sell for far less than it could sell for, or it may have kind of what we refer to as onerous deal terms around it. Because ironically, buyers are willing to take risks. That's why they're out looking to buy a company. But at the same time, they're really shy when it comes to taking on risk. So they do what they can to mitigate that risk, and it could be reflected in the price they pay or the deal terms that they offer or some combination thereof. And those are seldom in the best interest of the seller in that process. So that's a key factor that these home services business owners need to understand.
And so let's unpack a bit. What is the difference between just a normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill home service business and one who's actually thinking about selling? Because I know for a fact, because I deal a lot on the accounting side with these guys, that they've got personal things that they're paying for out of the business. They've got sometimes their children's expenses are being run through the business. We may have people on payroll who really aren't working in the business. There's a lot of those kind of things that happen, as well as just the normal inefficiencies and other profit leaks that we see in them.
Yeah. Well, I think those are all correct. We see those all the time. But the real key difference fundamentally is that when they're working in the business, they're focused on generating revenue and generating a bottom line profit and mitigating or minimizing their taxes as much as they possibly can. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of that. That's kind of standard day to day operations. But those aren't necessarily, at least in the case of mitigating taxes and their profits, uh, that's not necessarily in the best interest of creating value when they go to sell. The biggest reason we see why they don't invest into the business is because almost all of these companies are pass-through entities. They're either LLCs or S corps, and the distributions at the end of the year or the profits at the end of the year go as a distribution to them and hit their personal income tax. But if they are focused on creating value, as opposed to just taking the maximum distribution home, paying the least amount of taxes that they can, then they're going to be investing into the business in various areas. The first area we see where there's a huge shortcoming or shortfall is around succession planning. The vast majority of these home services business we see are extremely reliant on the owner of the business. He or she, and the term for that is called owner dependency. And it's one of the first questions buyers ask when they call us when we're marketing a company for sale and we have potential buyers sign a non disclosure agreement. Then we do a phone call with them to sort of interview them and vet them as a possible buyer for our client's business. Uh, we see that the first questions they ask are, why does the owner want to sell? Does he or she want to stay on or do they want to leave? And if they want to leave, how long are they willing to stay? Because the buyers are all going to want some kind of a transition and a knowledge transfer. The next question they have is because almost the vast majority of these buyers all want the owner to stay on for ideally 5 years, or at
Oh,
least
wow.
often 3 years. But a lot of owners they're willing to put in a year on a consulting basis to help with the transition. So the buyer is going to say, okay, do you have a successor? And the majority don't have a successor. So that the buyer sees that as a significant risk factor. Some will walk away at that point.
Okay.
Some will kind of put the deal on hold because they're going to have to go out and find somebody to step in and begin to run the company. Uh, but in either case, they're going to lose, the seller's going to lose potential buyers, or the buyer is again going to mitigate his or her risk as a buyer and reduce the price or change the terms or make the payout on the business in an earnout structure over a period of time of usually 2 to 3 years. So those aren't cases where it's really in the seller's best interest. So if they're going to have a successor place, they're obviously going to have to pay that individual. And if they're paying that individual, that's less distribution they're taking home at the end of the year. And
You
that's a
bet.
key reason why so many business owners and pass through entities don't really reinvest in their business.
Yeah, I think they get a little short-sighted sometimes and aren't thinking about the longer play of
That's
being
right.
able to
That's
get
right.
top dollar for this business. And
Yeah.
I know that I hear all the time from the home service guys, especially, it's so hard to find good help. They're all singing that tune, and we have been for the last probably 5 years or more, 5 to 7 years. It's so hard to find good help, but I think that is causing a lot of these owners to stay with their hands and feet in the business where maybe their goal was to be able to step back and not be quite so involved, but they haven't been able to find the help that they need. And so that causes problems, causes challenges
It sure
for,
does.
yeah,
And it's a fascinating phenomenon we're seeing today because in our firm we get clients from referrals from past happy clients or from CPAs and attorneys and wealth managers, uh, and we do a lot of digital marketing. So we get inbound leads, and when we take a call with a business owner, and it doesn't matter what industry today. It's crazy, whether white collar, blue collar, industrial. It's a fact that everyone says they can't get or find enough help. And frankly, that's a key driver for a lot of business owners when we say, well, why do you want to sell? And they tell us, and I won't use the language I've heard sometimes from these business owners, quite vitriolic, but they say basically, I can't find employees. I could be growing my business 10 or 20% more if I can have a full labor force, or I hire them and they never show up for work, or I hire them and they show up and they work for a week and then they disappear and ghost me with no notice on departure. So some of these owners get there intensely frustrated with this challenge. So for these business owners again who are considering selling throughout the home services industry is to take a good hard look at your benefit plans, your corporate culture, your work environment, your compensation structure, benchmark it against other companies in the industry or similar types of businesses in your city to make sure that you're keeping a happy workforce and a motivated workforce so that you can reduce your turnover as much as possible, which can never be eliminated. But the more stable your workforce is, again, the more value you're going to create in the business because a lot of buyers will ask, what's your employee churn? And a high churn rate, they see again as a risk factor and a challenge if they were to buy the business.
wow, there's a lot in that. Um, I know that a lot of the guys that we work with are really working hard on all of those items, their culture, their benefit plans, all those kinds of things, so they can find those A players. But that has definitely been a challenge. And I see owners all the time, they get to the point where they can step back and then they lose somebody and they're back in the truck with air quotes around that, back in the truck. That's not where they
Yeah.
wanted to be. And that cycle just seems to go on and on. And it makes it hard to have a smooth exit. What are some of the other areas that they should be thinking about when they are planning, just kind of entertaining the thought of exiting? We're not at the point where we're ready to call you yet, but prior to that
Yeah,
point, what are some of the areas that they should be
sure.
thinking about?
Well, I'll emphasize a little bit more on this owner dependency factor. So, I had a call a week ago with a business owner who very sharp. He had kind of a money machine kind of business, and we asked him the question of he had a 1-800 number, and we asked him the question of, well, when people call in wanting to know about doing business with you, do they call the 1-800 number? And he actually proudly and without hesitation responded, no, they call my cell phone. Well, that is a major red flag for buyers of businesses because that places huge owner dependency responsibility on that owner for maintaining the customer relationships and being the source of reputation for the company as opposed to the company's individual brand. So if they're the key knowledge holder, if there's technical knowledge involved, if there's, you just mentioned a second ago, if they're back out of the truck, well, either they're going to have to stay on after the company's sold to fill that role, or the buyer knows they're going to have an increased cost to go out and find somebody to drive that truck so that the selling owner, isn't driving that truck. So
Mhm.
those are a lot of the dynamics around this owner dependency factor that these business owners and home services companies, and again, broadly every industry, don't really understand.
Yeah.
But that's usually the second biggest detracting factor. The first one is really bad, poor, incomplete accounting.
I was
Uh,
just going to go there because I knew that one was coming.
it's amazing to me sometimes. Again, when these owners call us, we go through kind of an initial questioning process for them just to determine if they're going to be sellable or not. And that's one of the first questions we ask is, do you have an accountant or a bookkeeper or a CPA? Are your financials audited? And generally they'll have a bookkeeper, but it could be the owner's spouse, for example, who kind of has
Mhm.
just stepped in and doesn't really have dedicated training in that area, and they're virtually always on what books they're keeping are on a cash basis.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
buyers of these kinds of businesses want to see the numbers almost always on a GAAP base accounting base a basis and a excuse me an accrual accounting basis, and ideally GAAP compliant, because the buyers are going to borrow money from a bank. Oftentimes with service businesses, it's an SBA loan, and the banks and the SBA, they want to see accrual based accounting. And that can take a long time to switch or adjust from cash basis to accrual basis. So they may need a year or 2 years to go to an outside professional accounting firm and have all their financials completely restated. Compounding that is they oftentimes don't even have a balance sheet, and
Oh
the
no.
the the buyers, they want to see a balance sheet. And I have to also say they don't really pay attention to their accounting.
No, they don't.
Usually they can't tell me exactly what their revenues were last year, and even more of them have no idea what their profits were.
Right. Yeah.
And if they're properly preparing the business, they should be managing and making decisions based on their monthly accounting or financial performance of the business.
That's one of the things I love most about my coaching groups is we teach them how to read those financials. So now they're not just something that they ignore because they don't know what they are or how to use them, and they make them, that makes you feel like you're dumb if you don't know how to understand that. And we take that factor away and able to show them what these numbers mean and how they affect your business decisions. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, light bulb goes on. Even though they may have been in business for 15 or 20 years, Now the light bulb goes on and they start making different decisions because they start looking at those numbers and start using those numbers as a guiding light type of thing instead of the shoot from the hip, oh, I think we can just do this or do that. So
Yeah, you're
huge
exactly
difference.
right.
Yeah, when they can understand those numbers and not be afraid of them
Yeah.
because there's a
Yeah,
lot of
because
numbers for
yeah,
them to look at.
most of them don't even know how to read
Yeah.
an income statement to begin with. And that's assuming that they actually have detailed expense categories
Hmm.
from a general ledger standpoint. Here in the Kansas City area where I am, I'm a volunteer mentor in a program called the Hellsberg Executive Mentoring Program. It's for all types of small businesses. And I worked with an extremely talented, fascinating lady who ran a, a clinic for beauty and Botox and those kinds of things. And she was a brilliant doctor. She was a PhD medical doctor, but she did not know how to read an income statement. So I would meet with her once a month. And for the first few months, I would walk through everything in her statement and explain to her what those things meant. And then I told her after 3 months of that next month, you're going to walk me through the statement because it's easy to listen to it, but until you have
Hmm.
to really begin to think through it, you won't really know it. So it's kind of like the old biblical expression, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish, and he'll eat for a lifetime.
Right.
And now she is a super pro at those statements, and she's driving her entire corporate strategy around the performance she's seeing in each of her product lines and treatments that she provides to her customers.
Yeah, I find most, not all, but most home service businesses that I work with they might offer multiple service lines, but they have no idea if which ones are making them profit, which ones aren't, what kind of jobs are making them profit, and ones that aren't. And so it's such an important area because how can you put a business up for sale and not be able to answer the question? Let's say you call yourself a home services or just a services business, and maybe you offer plumbing and electrical and HVAC, but you don't know which of those lines are your profit makers. Maybe
That's
plumbing's costing you a ton of money and your HVAC and electrical are making you money, but you don't know that. And so, how can you get a buyer to buy your business when you can't answer those basic questions?
yeah.
Mhm.
Let's go with that for a little bit further because if they learn how to read an income statement and it is properly structured, they're going to look at the cost of goods. In other
Mhm.
words, what it costs them to deliver that revenue, but that equals gross profit and the gross profit margin. And that is something that none of these home services business owners that I've dealt with really pay attention to if they even know what it is or why it even matters. But buyers know, and every industry has sort of a standardized or an average gross profit margin. And if these companies have a gross profit margin above the industry average, that's a good thing. And it may help add to the value of the business. If it's kind of at the average, then it's a net neutral. If it's below average, we oftentimes see buyers just walk away because they think there are problems with the business. Or again, they're going to pay a significant discount because they're going to have to go in and figure out why the cost of goods were so much out of line with the revenue and why that impacted the gross profit margin. So it's one of
Right.
the critical factors that buyers assess when they make a decision on whether to make an offer at all or what that offer is going to look like and how big it's going to be.
I like that because gross profit is probably the most important number on an income statement or a P&L because that's the only number that you can fund the whole rest of your business off of.
That's
You
right.
have to have the gross profit. And without
That's
that
right.
number, you don't have your business starts sucking air because there's not enough cash to keep it operating. And oftentimes when I'm working with them, I see a jumbled up mess with expenses in gross profit that really are overhead. and expenses down and overhead that really are gross profit. And they think they're doing well and meeting those gross profit ratios. But when we correct how things are being coded, move the direct labor up and some of those kinds of things, then that gross profit percentage whittles down considerably. And so then we have to
Yes,
go in and find out why, what's causing that now, and fix that problem so that they can get back to it somewhere close to an industry average. And in my field, we say an industry average is only a C, your average. And if you want to sell that business, you need to be a B or an A to be able to make that business look enticing to a buyer.
true. And a second ago, Diane, you mentioned that, again, a lot of these service businesses, particularly if they're in the HVAC area, we see them integrating plumbing,
Hmm.
electrical, maybe low voltage, home generators, all within the same business model. And if they don't know the gross profit contributed by each of those categories, they could be getting robbed blind or just sucking money right out of the bottom line in one category where they're actually losing money rather than making money. And that's where utilizing the income statement to make strategic management planning decisions just for the daily operation of the business, much less in order to prepare or stage the company for an eventual sale to optimize the value. So that's a great example of how an income statement is a strategic management tool when it's properly used.
Hmm. Do you ever see differences between I'm going to call it a first generation business and its sale versus a second or a third generation business and their selling ability?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I don't recall a real correlating factor there. One of the biggest factors we do see is that the statistic is that 10,000 baby boomers turn age 65 every day, and they own a substantial percentage of privately owned or family owned companies in the United States. And their children no longer want to go into family business. They've often
Right.
seen,
Hmm.
their parents, because a lot of times the husband and wife are both working in the company. We see that a lot,
Hmm.
and they see how hard their parents work. Yeah, it's 24/7, 365, 7 days a week kind of thing. And they don't want that. So the owners, their business is generally their largest source of potential generational wealth and retirement income. So they're left with no option but to sell the company outright. And of
Okay.
course, the statistically, second generation companies, I think the general metric is only about 30%, I believe it is, of companies
It's very low.
transition to generation two, and something like only 10%
Yeah.
transition to generation three.
Three. Right.
Uh, so, if they have somebody in the company that has taken over the business that's a family member, typically that's an individual who's pretty sharp, sometimes better than the previous owner, who was often the father of the second generation. And
Right. Right.
usually they step into the business because they kind of came up through the ranks in the company, and so they have a good understanding of the business, and sometimes it's much better managed. Other
Right.
times we've seen the children of these Gen One owners. They sometimes it just get really screwed up. So
Uh-huh.
there's cases across the board.
Okay. I've always been curious as if there's any correlation in that or not. But I see it all the time. The kids do not want anything to do with the business. And so it forces mom and dad or mom or dad, whatever the combination is there, it forces them to make a decision that they hadn't planned on making. And sometimes the runway isn't long enough to fix the things that need to be fixed. They get
That's right.
backed up against the wall and end up having to sell.
Yeah. Or as we talked at the very beginning of our call here, uh, that's why they often need 2 or 3 or 4 years, because if they
Mhm.
can identify the problems, some of those simply can't be fixed overnight. So the next one, which is a prime example of that, is what we call customer dependency. So the litmus test that the buyers look for is if a business has more than 20% of its revenue coming from one customer, then that's a red flag for a whole lot of potential buyers. A lot of buyers will, that's an automatic elimination for a lot of buyers. For others, it's a yellow flag. And they're
Mhm.
going to, again, they're going to pay less or structure more of an earnout kind of a deal so that it could, in case that business walks away. Uh, Simple example, I had a client who had a small marketing and premiums and incentives agency, extremely creative guy. Uh, the business was small. It had huge owner dependency with him because he was the key creative guy. But he had a hospital chain that had 50 outlets, and there was a corporate headquarters. So his argument was, well, he had to call on every one of those 50 regional facilities, and the buyers all looked at it as, no, that's one customer and it's 50% of your business. And no one would pay him any cash on closing. It was all going to be, we're going to give you a job with a good salary and we're going to pay you an earnout stretched out over 3 years. And he got
Okay.
really upset and he refused to
Mhm.
take any of the offers. And lo and behold, 6 months later, there was a change in senior management at the hospital chain. And as often happens, the new person came in, made a change to their own vendor, and he lost
Mhm.
50% of his business, and his company was no longer sellable at all.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Wow. That's a scary thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's why it's so important. So if an owner is analyzing that kind of data today,
Mhm.
and they see that they have this dependency, customer dependency factor, that gives them a longer runway to go out and focus on driving revenue and generating new customers in order to mathematically reduce the reliance and on a percentage basis of that one key customer.
Mhm. Wow. These are some big steps that they have to take
Yeah.
between getting their books cleaned up, finding somebody who can actually run the company and letting the owner step back a bit, and then making sure they're not dependent on any one large customer. If the business has all three of those going, I can see why that would take a few years
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be able, because those are three big things to tackle all at once.
Right. And
Right.
also the service business and home services categories, any kind of service related business today are in high demand from buyers.
Okay.
It's just if an owner of an HVAC company or a plumbing company or electrical company called me today and said, "Hey Cam, I want to sell my company," we would go through, gather all the information, and I could make 25 or 30 phone calls and probably get 25 or 30 offers. There is such demand for those kind of businesses. And one of the reasons is so many of these industries, first of all, home services, especially if it involves maintenance and repair,
Mm-hmm.
are essentially recession resistant because stuff will always break,
Always break.
always need servicing, always need updating. So the market knows that's going to be the case. The other factor is many of these types of service businesses have maintenance contracts or reoccurring contracts, and that creates what's called reoccurring revenue. And buyers love that because it creates cash flow predictability. I had a call with an HVAC owner. I think he was in more rural Kentucky. This is about 3 years ago. And, I always ask, okay, are you selling maintenance contracts? And he barely paid attention to it. Only like 10% of his business was on a maintenance
Mhm.
contract. And I explained to him that he could probably double, maybe even triple what his company was worth if he had a substantial percentage of his annual revenue coming from maintenance contracts. So again, with any of these service businesses, if they don't have maintenance contracts, I would certainly kind of strategically think about, are there ways that you could create some so that you have that reoccurring revenue and that ongoing touch point with your customer base? If you have maintenance revenue, is it enough, or could you be really focused on getting that percentage up substantially? Because again, that's not going to happen overnight. And even if you suddenly were able to do it, buyers aren't going to give you full credit for it until they've seen a year or 2 years of
Hmm.
history to know that it is legitimate and sustainable.
So there's another area they need to work on. You're just making this homework list really long, aren't you?
Well, again, if they can execute on these tactics, if it's worth a half a million, a million, 2 million, whatever more, by
Worth it.
investing into this process and focusing on it. If it was my business, it sure would be worth it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing all these things because I think we get so busy in the day-to-day running of a business that we don't lift our heads up and look out there a ways down the road and start moving this business in the direction that it needs to go. So this has been a
Right.
great discussion and I thank you for this topic. It's timely again to be coming
Yeah, you
around with
bet.
this
You
kind of a
bet.
topic. Well, we're coming to the part of the show where we always talk about hidden or unique profit leaks. And as I've talked to guests over the last couple of years, we've come up with some pretty cool leaks that most or some of us may not have even thought about in our business. So I'm hoping you're going to wow us with a nice hidden or unique profit leak that you've seen when you're working with a home service business.
Sure. I'll identify a couple for you. And I had this one
Okay.
occur just recently, uh, and I see it more commonly in, for example, roofing repair type services.
Okay.
But there are cases where the owner of the company is attracted to taking payment in cash, and they don't put that cash on the books. Therefore, it doesn't accrue to profitability. But when it comes time to sell the company, they want credit for it. So just let's say they hypothetically they took a $500,000 in cash and they have a 10% profit margin. So that's going to drop $50,000 to the bottom line. Well,
Mhm.
companies are sold on a multiple of their profits. And if the company sells for 4 times their profits, they've just reduced their valuation by $200,000. And buyers and banks will not pay
No.
on cash business that is not documented through appropriate accounting. So that can be a significant cash leak. The other factor we see is around what we call capital expenditures. If they're doing any kind of accounting at all and they are expensing their capital expenditures, for example, if they buy a truck, not lease a truck, but if they buy a truck outright and they expense it, that is reducing their profitability. When in
Mhm.
fact, it should be reflected on their balance sheet, which increases back to the optimum, what we call adjusted seller's discretionary earnings or adjusted EBITDA profits. So those are two key profit leaks that we see on a pretty regular basis.
Wow, and those are two that we've not had on this program. So thank you. I
You
love it when
bet.
we get unique ones that we've not had before. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So listeners, I hope you were listening. And if you missed those, be sure and catch the replay of this episode because Cameron has just really dropped some great nuggets of wisdom for us. Because I know some of you are probably starting to think about maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to at least start entertaining that thought that how am I going to pass this business on? So, Cameron, thank you again for coming on the program today and talking about this. What's the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you and reach out and learn more about what you do?
Yes, thank you, Diane. So my email is cameron.bishop@raincatcher.com, and our website is www.raincatcher.com. or I'm easily found under Cameron Bishop on LinkedIn. And if I may, I'll leave with your listeners with one final thought. These home services business, as I mentioned, are a very attractive category for buyers. And I suspect every one of your listeners is being inundated with calls for people wanting to buy their company. And as someone who used to be on the buy side, I can tell you I never paid full price for a company I was buying if it wasn't in a competitive environment, because buyers love nothing better than not to have competition. And there are so many complicating factors around selling a company that sometimes what they think is the price is not really the price. So it's a commercial for my industry, brokers and investment bankers. Hire a professional to represent you. They will pay for more than themselves in the process.
Yes, and I agree with that. I said definitely get the put together the financial team that you need. And that should include somebody like yourself, somebody like myself, who can help them on the number side. Make sure you've got a good, strong attorney out there so that you're getting the best deal that you can get and that you don't end up with a agreement that has some wording in there that you weren't paying attention to. And now it catches you later on down the road and
It
can
sure can.
greatly affect the outcome of that sale. So, yeah, thank you again, Cameron. This has been great. And listeners, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. I know you're busy. I know you're hopping. Your businesses are growing. You're doing great stuff out there. And just thank you again for taking part of your day to spend with us and for investing in growth, investing in your own personal development, investing in ways that you can start identifying and plugging those profit leaks in your business. If you're interested in more of that, please reach out to me. We have boot camps and coaching groups going all the time. We'd love to talk to you about identifying some of those leaks in your business and figuring out ways to help you plug those and retain more of those profits. Get those bottom line numbers up there, get your gross profit number up where it should be. Thank you again, and we're going to call this one a wrap. Thanks, guys. Bye bye.